Welcome back to Nightly Nonsense. We're going to try to make some sense out of the nonsense all around us. I want to get political tonight. Are you ready? Right? We are in the middle of a presidential election, right? Which is probably one of the worst times in a country's existence, right? Because we see something that is crazy. Do you know what's funny? Like up until the general election, we have these primaries that sometimes go on, right? Where people try to become the nominee. Do you know what happens in that? People destroy each other with words, right? They try to position themselves by tearing down other people. First of all, that's not what God calls us to do. If you have to position yourself by tearing apart other people, you're not doing it God's way, right? Number one, there's no primaries in God's system. He's like, hey, I gotta destroy everybody else. We run it that way. See that some churches they run their pastoral search like a primary. Right? Like, hey, let's get people in here and try to get them to, decide why the other person shouldn't be, all of these different things. Right? But in a primary, we attack each other. Do you know one of the most amazing Christ-like things that happens after the primary? All of those people who attack each other, they suddenly love each other. They suddenly are all for the other person. They suddenly try to convince us that this person that they've been telling us is the worst person in the world is now the best person in the world. And you should definitely elect them. Do you know why? Because it doesn't matter who the person is. It matters what we stand for. Right? Do you know that God looks at this whole thing? Right? And God's like, the process matters. Right? What you say about other people, it matters. But we ought to, as Christians, we ought to have the same mindset. That when we're done with the moments, we're done and we're able to move on. Do you know that you ought to be able to have somebody that for whatever the reason, you just are adamantly against, right? It just doesn't work. You become adversaries. You don't want them anywhere around. And then suddenly something happens, usually forgiveness. And then restoration and reconciliation happen. And all of a sudden that person becomes valuable to us. Where do I get this idea from? Well, it's a normal idea and the world seems to do it pretty good. But it's about Christianity. Do you know Paul had this problem? Right? Paul didn't want John Mark anywhere around. They had no use for him. Threw a fit about taking him. Do you know that later on in his life, Paul actually asks for John Mark to be sent to him? He's valuable to me. Do you know at one point Paul says basically we can't take him with us. There's no value in taking him with us. And then later on in his life Paul says there's value in him. He's valuable to me. Bring him to me. Right? That's the restoration problem, the reconciliation problem. We don't always see it. Do you know what I love? I love at church when I know that there's tension between a couple people. Right? And you watch that play out, but then all of a sudden one Sunday you watch as those people are embracing or they're working together, right? Or they're talking about each other and you see that it's changed. Now listen, two people can for the right cause come together at any time and pretend like they're great. Right? But when you see heart changes, right? That's super important. So I want you to look at this political thing maybe a little bit different. Maybe we should be looking at this political thing and get some examples of how does the world got this right, but we don't? How do we have a problem with somebody and then we push them aside, we throw them away, right? You have no more value for me. But the world says, hey, after we're done with this moment, I'm going to be your biggest fan. I'm going to promote you. I'm going to help you. Now, the world does it for totally different reasons, and they're not right reasons. But we are too. So think about this tonight. Is there somebody in your life right now that you need to follow through with this? Is there somebody that you need to fix the relationship? You need to repent, right? You need to confess, hey, I haven't been in a good place with you. So that you can then become their biggest fan. Are you willing to let that happen? Or are you going to be like so many of the people that I know and go, well, we gotta love them, but we don't have to be anywhere near them. Imagine politics with that. You'd have nobody helping each other working. They say terrible things about each other. And then they come together and they work for the same cause. You and I are supposed to have the same cause. His name is Jesus. Can we get there? Can we get to a place where Jesus is the most important thing? that we're able to move on from moments. Can you be the biggest fan of somebody that 2 minutes earlier you were the biggest detractor? Can you do that? Think about that. We'll see you next time right here. Nightly Nonsense.